Mark here for Wisdom and Outs 5, and I bring on Rakim Slaughter, and we are going to discuss political tribalism. Rakim, talk about, what is happening right now in the US because it's a, election season and you see it like never before. You always see it, even not in a non-election season, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting because like I do feel like we saw some of like the political tribalism in 2016 and 2020 of course. But now I think it's becoming I think because of social media it's becoming
Hmm.
like extremely apparent that like um identity politics has very much a chokehold on a lot of the American population, whether that's like Republican or Democrat. And I think this is like the first time in my life where like I haven't really heard policies um talked about really from like either side. We might get like a few policy talking points like here and there. But even if we do get those policy talking points, like neither candidate is really telling you a detailed description of like how they are going to bring those policies about. Um, and I think it just kind of shows us that like I think we're just at the point in American politics where both parties are so comfortable and just playing like the identity politics game that they don't feel like they actually have to deliver on policies because as long as they can keep on playing that, we're better than
Hmm.
this side. I think a lot of people will still fall in line, unfortunately. Like I remember when climate change was a big policy platform for Democrats. I haven't heard any kind of like climate change
Hmm.
policies from the Democrats at all. So like I
None.
guess climate change isn't even just a thing anymore. At a time when the climate is like utterly collapsing. Um, and yeah, I think it just goes all back to like local tribalism, just like playing, this side against this side. And it's still a very effective strategy, unfortunately, because we don't really demand more from our politicians. And if we just keep on rewarding them with our votes, regardless of like what policies they're delivering, then that just tells them that like they don't have to offer us any
Hmm.
policies.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on things like, remember how the Democrats promised, student loan forgiveness? What do you think about that? That never happened.
Yeah, that never. Yeah, yeah, they did their like litmus test thing where it was
Hmm.
like, well, we'll forgive your loans if you went to this school and this year and majored in this. Yeah, I think that was like such a huge like talking point for a lot of people, a lot of voters, and that was a talking point for the party for a while. And then yeah, like once they got in, we saw that like slowly evaporate. And now like you still have people to this day that are, you know, like really suffering under the weight of student loans, and I'm being one of them. I have currently $70,000 in student loans.
Hmm. No, I
um,
feel yeah.
and
I'm with you.
I just think that's
Yeah, and people will fight tooth and
yeah,
nail and
but
say,
I think that's
well,
like
people will say it's not the Democrats. Like they fought for it and it was struck down and all this stuff. They'll make so many excuses, I think, in my opinion.
oh yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I do find it interesting how I was just thinking about this the other day where it it kind of seems like we hear that the Republican president is all powerful and can single-handedly do bring America to his knees and do whatever he wants or whatever they want. But the Democratic president is somehow like just has no power whatsoever. And their hands are always tied when it comes
Mhm.
to completing our ask. So it's very interesting that like that's kind of like the narrative that the Republican president is all powerful and the Democratic president has absolutely no power.
Yeah, I'm with you
And then there's like
100%. It doesn't.
Yeah, and then you ask yourself like,
Obviously,
okay,
we
well,
know that none of the Republicans were for, student loan forgiveness whatsoever. But of course, they'll be
oh yeah,
for,
they were.
funding Israel. That's for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah. I mean, yeah, they didn't. I mean, yeah, they didn't support it either. And I mean, at the end of the day, I guess they still got their way because
Hmm.
like because
Yeah.
our student loans aren't being forgiven. So like so they're still having their policy um goals met, unfortunately, while the rest of us are just suffering from these student loans. So
But there's just so much when it comes to, politics. Like so many people are like, oh, for example, I used to live in Chicago and I, mentor on the south side of Chicago, and
mhm.
everyone wants to say, and this was like 2005 to 2007, so around that time. But everyone wants to say, oh, Chicago's so dangerous because they got a Democrat or because if they had a Republican or something. It's all nonsense. I personally, I mean, yeah, there's probably parts of Chicago that's dangerous, of course, but I mean, I don't know. I just don't buy into that narrative. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm. Yeah. It's funny that you actually brought up Chicago.
Okay.
Because I don't know if you have been keeping up with like the current news in Chicago. But the mayor, and he's a black mayor,
Mm-hmm.
just recently called for a like increase in like property taxes. And I think it was like I want to say 300 million.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because they have the budget shortfall, and I was just like curious and being like, oh, like what is their police budget?
Mm-hmm.
It's $2 billion. It was $2 billion in
Oh,
2024.
jeez. Oh, I'm
So
not
I'm like,
surprised, but
this is when we like when we say like you can defund the police, but it's not even an option for them. So like, so instead, you're literally taking more money from the working class
mm-hmm.
instead of just taking money from the police because that's how the system works, right? Like the system like doesn't even consider ever defunding the police in like any way, shape, or form. So I think it's funny that you mentioned Chicago because I was like, oh, I was just reading about Chicago.
Yeah, no, it must be fitting, that's for sure. Yeah. And then did you ever think that when did you wake up to, our politics are so influenced by APAC and that we're so obsessed with, funding and pleasing Israel? When did you wake up to that?
Oh, definitely. So I mean, I've always like recognized that like, lobbying had a chokehold on our political system. I didn't really understand like how influential APAC was until after October 7th, 2023.
Hmm.
And just like seeing, like what our government was telling us was completely different than what we were seeing on social media apps like TikTok and Instagram. Um, and it really was just like this like playbook language that they would use, just repeat over and over and over. And you're just like, yeah, I know this isn't right. Even I
Hmm.
mean, even to this day, you still have politicians on both sides that are talking about um, you know, Hamas did this like horrible thing, and they killed Israelis on October 7th, but like they never mentioned how Israel enacted the Hannibal Directive, killing their
Hmm.
own like unaliving their own citizens, right? Like that's not even a thing that they even bring up, and it's like, why are you so afraid to bring that up, right? Um, and then just seeing like the censorship that was happening on social media. Um, our politicians just utterly just falling in line and just sticking to the playbook. Them demonizing like organizations like Jewish Voices for Peace, uh,
Hmm.
and of course, like the student protest and seeing how they responded to the student protest. And then like, even Kamala Harris coming out and saying that these protesters are basically like terrorists. And it is definitely scary because I think for like the last year, a lot of us have been saying like, hey, like this is so much bigger than Palestine. If you do not uh subjugate yourself to the Zionist
Hmm.
ideology, like they are, like you are the terrorists in their reality. Like you threaten their lie, their reality. So like of course they're
Hmm.
afraid of you. Like so by their definition, you very much are the terrorist.
Hmm.
Um and we're just seeing that like really unfold in front of our eyes. And I think TikTok has played a huge part in us being able to like really like see the timeline of events unfolding in front of
Hmm.
us.
Especially with Meta. Meta was caught censoring. Former Meta employees said they were censoring,
Yeah.
information from pro-Palestinians. It's ridiculous.
I don't know, like, I don't know if you've had like had a similar experience, but I've tried to share things that I've seen from TikTok onto Instagram, and it was like it's been like completely blocked. Like probably
Yeah.
like
Oh yeah. No,
50%.
they were coming after my account on Instagram.
Really?
Hmm. Oh yeah. They
Yeah,
no,
it's
they
crazy.
were going hard. Yeah. I know. Hmm.
Yeah, so it is. Yeah, it is interesting to like, yeah, it's like to see like the censorship happening. And I mean, even with the mainstream media too, like some of these headlines are so misleading.
Yeah.
Um, that like if you you know, especially like, I feel like if you're within the older generation or you're just like someone who isn't on TikTok, and the only thing you're being exposed to is mainstream media, like I think your perception of the events is so distorted
Hmm.
because all you're getting is the mainstream media narrative, which is very like pro-imperialism, pro-Zionist,
Hmm.
pro-colonization. Uh, so it, yeah, I'm just very grateful that we do live in a time when we have like access to like these platforms for the time being, because
Sure. No,
you know,
I'm with
yeah,
you. Yeah. And
they're not real like
I don't know if you were aware. Did you watch any of the Olympics? I'm like not a huge
no,
sports fan
I
anymore,
used
but get
to.
this. So I'm watching it because I have Peacock. So I'm watching all the Palestinians, and my ex is Vietnamese, so I'm watching Vietnam, and I like Spain. So I'm watching this. It was Taekwondo, I think it was, or judo, one of
Oh,
those. I think it was Taekwondo. Okay, it was that event, and it was a Palestinian, and he was fighting against somebody who was part of the Olympic Refugee Committee, originally from Iran. And guess what they did when they showed? But this is the cameraman. This wasn't the announcers. The cameraman showed a bunch of Israelis in the stands waving the Israel flag before the Palestinian came out.
wow,
That's
wow,
NBC for you. That's and
yeah.
I made a video about it. It's just like because I was watching it to pick these things out, and then you had that fiasco with breakdancing, right? And I grew
Mhm.
up a big breakdancing fan, breaking to Electric Boogaloo and all that. As soon as that thing happened with Ray Gun, what Peacock did, because they normally keep the events up for like 2 to 3 weeks, right?
Mhm.
They got rid of the event right away off their streaming platform. All the breaking events, they just took it down.
Yeah, I think like you know you mentioned the whole camera view thing, and I think I see more now than ever before that it
Mm-hmm.
really is like a visual hatred for
Mm-hmm.
Muslim and Arabs, because like doing that is like it's so intentional, and you you can't convince me that that isn't a form of just like mental abuse
Mm-hmm.
that they are inflicting upon our Muslim and Arab brothers, and just being like yeah, we're gonna, you're going through this horrific event and we're still going to like rub salt on the wound. 'Cause like you didn't have to do that.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Um
the other
and
thing they did too. Do you remember the swimmer Yazan Al Bawab? I think was his name. Guess what they did? They completely. It was on originally. I guess it was originally on USA Network. They completely. He was like in the second heat or something, or the first heat. They started with the second heat. They completely skipped his heat. They didn't even show it.
wow.
Now that is discrimination at its best.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, I mean, it is definitely interesting to see because I think we had this idea that like the Olympics aren't political, but they've
No.
always been sports. Sports has always played a role in politics, and like
Hmm.
I'm viewing it through my lens of a black person and like black history. But black athletes have experienced very much like very similar treatment
Hmm.
in sports when we were fighting for our own civil rights. So it's interesting that we have this idea that like, sports aren't political, the Olympics are political, and it's like, no, they very much are the whole point of the
Hmm.
Olympics is politics.
Oh
is
yeah.
to is to paint a positive image of your country on a global stage. Like there's nothing more political than that.
No, they really politicized the opening ceremonies too.
Mhm. Yeah, so yeah, I just hope that like people really like start to I don't know, just really critically think about like what does politics mean? Because
Hmm.
politics is everything. It's the music we're exposed to, it's the movies we're exposed to, it's the food that we eat, it's the climate, it's our health care. To exist in this world is to consistently be involved in
Hmm.
politics. Whether you actively engage in that system or not, you're still a part of that system. You can only remove yourself from that system so much. Like the air we breathe is political because of
Hmm.
pollution. Like everything's political.
Yeah. What do you think about people? Because I recently saw an interview, and I'm originally from Michigan, and he's from there. Michael Moore, he's talking to Mehdi Hassan, and he's like, "Well, I'm not going to tell. I don't know if you saw it. He said, I'm not going to tell the Muslims in Dearborn, Michigan, how to vote. I'm not going to go in there with my white privilege and tell the Muslims in Michigan how to vote." But he goes, there was 3 million people who didn't vote last election in Michigan. If we can get 40,000 of those votes for Kamala, it's like a guy like that. Wouldn't you think that he would eventually wake up to, supporting a third party, or do you think he's just all bought and sold?
Um, I used to I watched a few Michael Moore documentaries back in the
Hmm.
day. Back in the day, like I'm like 60, but
No, no, I'm
um,
I'm I'm the
but
same way.
he's done some good work. It's yeah, it is like I think it really just shows that like the two party system really um has indoctrinated us into it to just like perpetuate
Hmm.
the system, right? Um, because it's like it's one thing to tell people to say like it's one thing to say like, hey, you should vote for Democrat if that's what you believe, vote for Republican if that's what you believe. But it people never legitimize like there's like this still like this delegitimization of third
Hmm.
party alternatives. And the two-party system, particularly Democrats, because Democrats have been extremely antagonistic towards the Green Party per se. Like they just don't want to legitimize these alternatives that have very good policies. And it's actually funny because now I'm thinking about like how AOC was part of the Green Party eventually. Once upon a time, and then she took their platform, the Green New Deal,
Hmm.
and worked that into the Democratic apparatus to give her own self like recognition. And now she's delegitimizing the Green Party.
Hmm.
So
Oh,
like
big time.
she took these policies from the Green Party in order to build her own platform, only to turn around and delegitimize the Green Party once she became part of the establishment. Because
Hmm.
we all know that America is essentially an oligarchy. There's been studies that have shown that public opinion has almost, I think it was actually 0% impact on our policies. It's money and wealth that determines American policy, and that's the definition of an oligarchy. And yeah, it's very interesting to see like people going into the two major parties because that's where the money is. And then in order to be part of that two-party system, you have to, delegitimize uh things that exist outside of that party.
Hmm.
So yeah, so Michael Moore, like, you know, um, still upholding a party that we know
Hmm.
is a white supremacist organization. Biden is literally a known segregationist, right? And one of his most famous racist quotes was that he didn't want his kids to be integrated into schools with black children because he didn't want them going to a racial jungle, right?
Oh yeah.
Um, so I think it's interesting that they are very quick to call out the racism. Democrats are very quick to call out the racism within the Republican Party, which is valid, but completely and totally dismiss any critiques of the own racism within their own party. And that's where, I think political tribalism comes in because we're really seeing that a lot of Democratic voters care more about the image of their
Hmm.
party than the rights of humans, right? Whether those people are like children, trans people, people of color. Anytime Democrats are in office, we're not supposed to talk about the things that are happening under the Democrats.
Yeah, yeah, you said it perfectly. And do you want to discuss Kamala, I should say,
Yeah.
because one thing I've noticed, especially recently, a lot of people have been pro-Palestinians have been disrupting, her, violently disrupting her,
Mhm.
speeches, and you can tell she doesn't care. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Um, yeah, I've never liked Kamala. I've never liked Biden. I I think that she definitely was a very strategic choice by the Democrats in order to play like the identity politics game. And I don't know, I just find it very interesting that, we're coming off of the cusp of, I mean, we're coming off of, Black Lives Matter and us better controlling the narrative surrounding policing in our country and saying things like, like all police are the problem. Law enforcement is inherently racist in America, and we know the history of this. Um, and now, and the Democrats' response to that was not to defund policing, not to fund our communities. It was to give us the top law enforcement officer, in her own words,
Mhm.
as a presidential candidate. So I think this just like really goes to show you like how the Democrats uh gatekeep social progress. They, you know, they use the moniker of leftism, but they're not left at all. They're at best like center right, at best. And we're seeing them move further and further to the right. So we'll see what happens in the next couple of years. Um, but she got on stage and told the entire world that she wants to have the most lethal fighting force at a time when the climate is collapsing and the US military is the greatest polluter in the world.
Mhm.
And it's just very unfortunate that we were having this discussion just a few years ago about how policing and law enforcement are racist and gatekeepers of social progress. And now we have a major party putting up a top law enforcement officer as their candidate. And we know what that is going to mean for law enforcement, right? It
Mhm.
means more money for law enforcement, more militarization, which is going to be the most harmful to Black and brown communities. And of course, I also want to point out the trans community too, because the trans community is really, really suffering right now and has been suffering for a really long time. And their relationship with law enforcement for decades has been extremely, extremely antagonistic
Mhm.
and harmful. So, that's what's in store if um, Kamala Harris does become president. Like we already know what's going to happen because it's already been happening under Democrats. We're seeing more police funding now under Biden and Harris
Mhm.
than we did under Trump. We're seeing more police shootings now under Biden and Harris than we did under Trump. But once again, like when Democrats are in control of the White House, these issues somehow disappear.
Mhm.
And I've actually had like liberals even tell me that it's just a few bad apples, that policing isn't racist, that the way we fix the issue is to give them more money and better training. Um, so it's yeah, it's just like I think that's why finding alternative parties is so important because I think the Democrats have consistently shown that they have no interest in actually meeting the needs of the people. And if you follow the money back from Republican and Democrat, it all goes back to the same exact people. They're all funded by the same corporations, oil lobbyists, big pharma, the military-industrial complex. Like those are their benefactors, and that's whose interests they're going to look out for. They're not going to look out for the working class people. And police, historically, and to this day, have been um, the individuals that are there to essentially wage war on the working class. Anytime the working class is asking for, unionization or climate change action, like I remember like Standing Rock and seeing how the police came out and just completely and totally brutalized
Mhm.
uh, indigenous people that were just trying to protect their own lands and asking America to literally uphold the treaties that America like agreed to. Yeah, so I mean we know what's in store if Harris does become president. It's just going to be more policing, more military. She's told us that. And it's just unfortunate that the only thing the two-party system can offer us is white supremacy or white
Mhm.
supremacy.
Yeah, one thing I will say when it comes to third parties, when do you think it really started to gain steam? I would say 2016. A lot of people did not want Trump. They didn't want Hillary. Because I was living in LA at the time, and I remember my friend Don, who it's the same thing, his brother voted for Jill Stein back then, and he got what was going on, and he's like, Mark, under no terms vote for Kamala Harris, because Kamala Harris was on the ballot, of course. He's like, vote for, I forget who the other candidate was, but he's like, you cannot vote for Kamala Harris. She's put too many,
Yeah,
people away. People don't get it, her history.
yeah. I think yeah, it's funny because like I didn't even know Green Party was a thing until a few years ago.
Hmm.
And I think it might have been yeah, I want to say I started to hear about them in 2016 as well. And I didn't take them too seriously because like at that time I was like starting to like deconstruct and start to move away from the Democratic Party. I think I really started to like learn about the Green Party in 2020, and I started to take them more seriously. And then of course now, with everything that's happening and just seeing that, in 2020 we weren't even promised like radical change.
Hmm.
Actually, if I remember correctly, I remember Biden running on nothing will fundamentally change.
Yeah,
Like I remember him saying
exactly.
that. Um, and but I remember like in 2020, like climate change, Gen Z bringing up climate change was like a big thing,
Hmm.
and the climate has just gotten fundamentally worse. So then I was like, okay, like the Democrats are at this point, they're like literally pretending that like climate change doesn't even exist, because US
No, you never hear
regulations
anything, even from local candidates.
never,
Nothing.
never like
Hmm.
it's yeah, like I haven't heard, I cannot remember the last time I heard a politician mention, like a Democratic politician mention climate change, let alone in a serious capacity.
Hmm.
So with everything that's happened, like with just everything that's happened within the last 4 years, with the climate, um, I was just like, okay, like let's see what Green Party has, and I just starts like look at their platform, and I also just really am at the point where I recognize that like capitalism is the issue, right? This idea of like infinite growth on a finite planet, and we have science that literally tells us that we need to have a degrowth economy, that the literal planet can no longer support an exponential growth economy. And for a party that prides itself on being so intellectual and pro science, I find it very interesting that they claim they love to be called capitalists, even though science is literally saying capitalism is killing us.
Hmm.
So it's like, okay, so do you not support the science that tells us that we can no longer have capitalism because it is impacting your power and privilege?
Hmm.
So are you only pro science when you can use it to get a leg up on Republicans?
Yeah. I want to get your predictions on, what's going to happen next Tuesday, but I want to chime in because this is a federal organization. I want to chime in on FEMA because I don't know if you're aware of this, but FEMA on their LinkedIn, they had a picture from 2020 saying, we're gonna APAC is here to respond to take care of the crisis with COVID-19, and who's at the table with them, and this is on their LinkedIn, is Trump. It's like,
Oh,
so FEMA's in with APAC big time. And
mhm.
the leader of FEMA, she met with Israel. She met in Israel with not Netanyahu, but like officials. And the one thing that's sad is, I live in North Carolina, and on the other side of the state, I got a good friend that I talk to every day where I work. He comes in and he lost his sister, brother-in-law, and their 7-year old. And it's just like when she comes on, I don't know if you've seen any of her interviews, but she's all pushing this Trump, Trump, Trump narrative. And it's like, these are just citizens. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Hmm.
It's just like, why label somebody?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that I think APAC and the US government very much they push the division. They
Mhm.
perpetuate the division that is within the American populace, because a divided people is a people that's easier to manipulate. And I think that I never used to really like understand what Republicans, at least not as much as I do now, what Republicans will say about how they feel like they've been abandoned by uh, the elite, right?
Mhm.
And in their mind, the elite are the liberals, which I mean, valid. And I think now I totally understand it at a much deeper level of what they were trying to tell us, because it is this idea that like yeah, like if these people are not voting for me, like why do I have to even serve these people, right? Like you're
Mhm.
only like you're only valuable if I believe I can get your vote.
Mhm.
Like if I cannot get your vote, then I will discard you. And I'm not saying that the Republicans also don't do that. But I think the thing is like, Democrats, they love to create this narrative that they're for all people. They're here to like unite the world, and look out for like all human rights. And that's just like even in our own country, that's not true. Because I mean there are millions of poor working class white people
Hmm.
um, that are suffering too, right? So I think that's just how liberalism works, is that yeah, like if we can't get these if we'll try and get these votes, we'll try and like use like tragedies and people's like anger in order to empower ourselves. But if we can't get these votes, then we have no use for these people. So why even bother to meet their policy agendas at all, or meet their basic human needs?
Yeah. Now, what do you think about what do you think is going to happen on Tuesday? Do you have any thoughts on that, or would you like to chime in?
Uh, I go back, honestly I go back and forth. I go back and forth because like sometimes I'm like, oh no, I think Trump might have this, and then sometimes I'm like, oh no, I think Kamala might have it. Um, yeah, I don't, because like because I look at the numbers compared to 2020 and just seeing how like Biden won so many important states with like very slim margins. Um, but I don't want to compare it to like 2020 because like what's happening right now is what's happening right now.
Mhm.
Um, so I mean, yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I go back and forth. It's like sometimes I think where I'm at right now, I'm like, oh, maybe Kamala might have it.
Mhm.
Um, but it's yeah, I mean, polls are polls. I think polls, like, they don't really capture like the real emotions on the ground. There's people that don't really participate in voting that may come out and vote. I actually saw something on, I think it was MSNBC, and they were saying that I think they said like Trump has the majority of men who don't vote. Like he's leading Kamala with by like 10 points in that demographic. Because those are people that like have like the least amount of interest in politics. But just because they've had the least amount of interest in the past doesn't mean that will be the case now. Um, so yeah, it's just yeah, I'm curious to like see uh how it plays out. The Democrats may be able to um pull out a victory, and I think like if they do, like now my biggest concern is what does it mean when political party now knows that they can commit the most documented genocide in human history
Mhm.
and still maintain power. Like I feel like that's a discussion that we haven't really been having, and I think that's a very important discussion to have. Um, and I'm sure like people outside of the US probably are deeply concerned about what that could possibly mean for the world outside the US.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, a lot of Americans aren't really talking about that, which I think is like very unfortunate. Because like yeah, I think that's like a very scary question, honestly.
No, and it's a legitimate question. And if you look at something like, you know how they said Hakeem Jeffries might, oust, Mike Johnson for Speaker of the House, and Hakeem Jeffries received more money than Mike. Not that we like
Yeah.
Mike Johnson, and we're like, oh my God, you can't get what's worse than Mike Johnson, and then
Yeah.
Hakeem Jeffries gets this money from
Yeah,
AIPAC.
no. Yeah, no. Hakeem Jeffries is he is extremely pro-Israel.
Mhm.
Yeah, I remember when he came into the scene, what, a few, I mean, he's been on the scene for a few years ago. And yeah, my first thought was like, oh, like, okay, like a young black guy. And then he opened his mouth.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, he's not for me. He's not for me. He's different. And yeah, just seeing him just be extremely pro-Israel over the last year. spreading like Zionist propaganda, without shame, like honestly, like without
Mhm.
shame, and not even just like without shame, but like it's to the point where like I almost think he believes it,
Mhm.
which may even be like more worrisome is because it's one thing, I don't know, I think it's one thing to be like, oh, I'm doing this for the money, uh but I know what's actually happening. It is another thing to like be so thoroughly indoctrinated that like the information that we are seeing with our own eyes, like you're just
Mhm.
completely and totally disconnected from that reality. Like yeah, yeah, I mean, I think I think we've talked about this a lot. Like, communists and socialists have talked about the reality that the US empire is collapsing. That's something that neither party truly wants to admit. And they are trying to maintain this illusion that, America is like stronger than ever and our best days are ahead of us. And that's just not the reality of a collapsing empire. And it's just it's very interesting to see them like create this like narrative and maintain that. And I think we are just going to continue to fall into fascism regardless of which party wins. And, I'm pretty sure 4 years from now, we'll be having the same people saying the same things about now isn't the
Mhm.
time to vote third party, right? It's literally never the time to vote third party. And if the reality is that America is going to get worse regardless,
Mhm.
when is the time to do something different, right? Because that's the reality that we're facing is that both parties are moving further to the right. America is collapsing. America, the best America is going to be is today, right?
Mhm.
like every day is going to be a worse day for America and Americans. So there might be like some relative like peace, but peace doesn't mean that things
Mhm.
are peace doesn't mean justice, and peace doesn't mean that things are changing course within America.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's very I don't know like when people are going to like wake up to reality of just doing the same thing over and over and over is just kicking the can down the road. And I feel like we're
Mhm.
at the point where that's what a lot of people are essentially trying to do, in my opinion, is just kick the can down the road. And I think a lot of adults aren't really living up to their responsibility of um making like the hard sacrifices now.
Mhm.
And we're leaving our children with a very, very disastrous future, unfortunately, because uh we want to maintain our comfort and privilege for as long as possible. And we're seeing that, American comfort and privilege comes at the expense of the entire world, right? Like it doesn't just impact Americans, it impacts the entire world, because we still want to consume. We don't want to change the way we live. We don't want to face those hard questions of, who are we without all the material things that we've been fed our entire lives. And I can see why the world looks at Americans with a side eye,
Mhm.
right? And question our the beliefs that we say we believe, right? Like question our core values because we've been telling the world this entire time that we care about moving the world into a positive direction. Meanwhile, we're doing the complete opposite. Um, like complete opposite. No matter what party is in power, we're harming the entire world and we're sacrificing the future of children all around the world because we're not willing to face the reality of what America is and how U.S. imperialism impacts the entire globe.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. And unfortunately, I don't see it, but I will say this: people are. like you and I and many others, and especially like these on TikTok and these protesters too. The narrative is completely spun on the any of the pro-Palestinian protesters. I mean, they're the most peaceful people around. I mean, that's one of the most
Mhm.
peaceful, protest groups. I mean, I have a friend who works at UCLA. He can attest and no, they're the most peaceful people there are,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah, my mom, she worked at a university, and she was saying that like on the news she was hearing. This was like 11 months ago. So this is like when everything first started
Hmm.
happening, and she was saying like the news was painting these protesters as like these like violent individuals, and she was like, "Bruh," she was like, "I walked past them." She was like, they had a guitar and they were all singing." Like,
Yeah, exactly.
so 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 it is like a completely different narrative. But I also think that we need to get comfortable with this idea of um resistance doesn't always look like sitting in a circle
Hmm.
singing and playing guitar,
No.
right? Um, but under the system of America, the only people that are allowed to commit violence are the people in power, right? It's not the working class is not allowed to commit any kind of violence
Hmm.
whatsoever. We can barely even say our opinions on social media without being censored, right?
Oh, it's
um,
nuts. Hmm.
yeah. I've had like so many like comments removed over like the last week that like are pretty tame comments. Like I said, someone's views was just I just found their views like
Hmm.
disgusting. And TikTok was like, well, you can't say that, and I'm like, oh man, I can't even say that anymore. So it's getting there's this like I think it's interesting that we've heard this rhetoric of like socialists and communists and anti-war protesters, pro-Palestinian people. They're looking for moral purity, right? And I don't think that is what we're asking for at all. I
Hmm.
don't think that asking for someone that is not committing a genocide is a moral purity like test,
Hmm.
right? Um, it seems like the only people that are pushing this moral purity narrative are the oppressors,
Hmm.
right? So it's this idea that we have to be these like saints in the face of our oppression. Like we're not allowed to we're not even allowed to be angry, right? And as a black person, I noticed like all too well, right? The angry black man, angry black woman trope, right? Like we're not supposed to be angry in the face of the racism that we are faced with
Hmm.
every single day in America. So it seems like the only people that are asking for moral purity are the politicians. And then it's unfortunate that we hear people within the working class pushing the same rhetoric and trying to like shame those who refuse to vote within the two-party system. And I actually heard someone the other day say that we're being moral narcissist. Um, and so it was like, so the actual narcissists that are committing genocide
Hmm.
are they're just misunderstood.
Hmm.
You know, things are complicated. They're doing the best they can. They get so much sympathy and understanding, but
Hmm.
the people that are being like, yeah, I refuse to feed my abuser my energy, are being called the moral narcissist. So I just think it's very interesting that like American politics is at this point where the people that refuse to uphold their abusers um, are getting so much anger. Meanwhile, the ones that are abusing us are getting sympathy and humanization while we're still suffering with being dehumanized.
Yeah, yeah, I think you summed it up perfectly. What do you think about this is what I wanted to ask you. Do you really think that Bernie Sanders was marching with Martin Luther King Jr.? You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah. Um, you know what? I will always be grateful for Bernie for helping me find my progressive path.
Hmm.
Um, but I do question I honestly I do question what his intention was because um he's still a Zionist, right?
Hmm.
And I have yet to meet a Zionist that is not racist, right? And we have to remember that like there's Black Palestinians, right? There's Afro Palestinians who are suffering under apartheid right now.
Hmm.
So if you can dehumanize Afro Palestinians, what how am I supposed to believe that you can't dehumanize me?
Hmm.
Like, right? So I do question the like, yeah, we know he was there. We have the photos of him being there, but what was the intention of it? Was it because you actually cared about human rights? Was it because you were trying to you attach yourself to a movement in order to prop up yourself and portray this image that you believe in all these ideals? Because I just find it hard to believe that you you can be a Zionist and be pro-black
Hmm.
because we know the history of the IOF training police in America, right? Um, so I will say that Zionism is also inherently anti-black. And we've had Israeli representatives even say that their greatest threat is the black youth. Um, I don't know if you see that video. It was a woman speaker. I can't remember her name, but she has said that the greatest threat to Israel right now or black youth in America. And I think that says a lot about what Zionism thinks about us as a people.
Well, we've been going for about an hour. I really appreciate the conversation. Is there anything you want to say in closing?
Um, yeah, just I hope everyone just votes you know, how they believe they should vote. I will never tell people to vote one way over the other. I do hope that people will continue to research third parties and understand that capitalism is inherently oppressive system. It is a class-based system. There will never be true equality under any capitalist system. So when a politician is telling you that they are proudly capitalist, they are telling you that they do not believe in equality. They cannot make that point any more clearer than to tell you that they are a capitalist, which is a system that is inherently um, unequal. So yeah, I enjoyed this conversation, Mark. It was thank you for having me on. I hope that whoever wins, that people will continue to, do the hard community organizing and continue to have like working class solidarity because the US government has consistently shown us that we are
Hmm.
on our own.
Oh yeah, and do
We've had
grassroots efforts, of course, too. Even I think locally,
yes.
like local elections,
Oh,
maybe
local, yes,
even.
local. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. No, I think yeah, I think that we definitely need to pay less. Like in my ideal world, what's happening at the federal level would have very, very small, like a very small impact on
Hmm.
your daily life. Like to the point where like we shouldn't even really be caring about it too much.
Hmm.
Um, I think people need to be more involved in their local communities. Because I also think that's a great way of like join a picket line. Like if you see someone if you see workers striking, just join a
Hmm.
picket line, go support them, go talk to them, and you will realize that a lot of the same issues that they have with their employers is the same issues that you have with your employers. We're all working class individuals trying to make it under this exploitative system. So yeah, just working class solidarity now and forever.
Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. This was such a great, conversation. I'll be sure to post your, TikTok link on the bottom. So really appreciate it, Rakim. This is a great conversation.
Thank you.